Okay, we're gonna do a quick intro to wheel throwing, and here's what we need. I've got an apron on to protect my legs, not essential, but helpful. I've got a rag. Sometimes I just use a big towel over the whole thing, that works too. I've got my wheel. It is plugged in, it is turned on, and it is going in the right direction. I am right-handed, so my wheel is going to go counterclockwise. If you're left-handed, some of the wheels go in the other direction. On this particular wheel, it's called forward, which is counterclockwise, and reverse, which is clockwise. So if you're left-handed, you can do everything the opposite, mirror image of what I do. But we are using both hands in a really dexterous way. So you can also try doing what I do, even if you're left-handed. There are some schools of thought that insist upon the right-handed direction. I am not one of those schools of thought. I think you should do what is comfortable for you. So if you're left-handed, you can switch, or you can try the so-called right-handed way. I've got bats. These are gonna sit on my wheel head's bat pins. This will allow me to remove my objects easily. I've got a good sized bucket and plenty of water. It's almost full. Even a bigger bucket is great because we get a lot of clay residue in here. I've got a sponge, that's essential. Got my wire tool, my wooden knife, and a needle tool. I've also got several balls of clay prepped. These are 1 pound each. It is not essential that they all be the exact same weight, but it's a good habit to get into. It's a skill we'll use later when we're trying to make things exactly the same as we progress in this skill. I've got them wrapped in plastic because I don't want them drying out a ton before I get to them. And we're gonna get started. So I'm gonna just center my bat on the pins. I'm using a plastic bat. There are also masonite bats. There are a ton of kinds of bats, but we have both plastic and masonite in the studio. Sometimes they'll move just a little, which can be annoying when you're throwing. So I usually take a little snippet of clay and just kind of rub it around where the bat pin is, or even like somewhere else. And this just helps stick down my bat really well, so I don't get as much movement. You can also just put a little bit into that recess where the bat pin is, and you can add more or whatever. I like to do that with each bat just so that they don't scooch around. We do centering on the left side of the wheel head. If we look at the wheel head like a clock, we will be centering between 6 and 9 o'clock. We're gonna open our pot. So we're gonna actually open up the pot, make the inside of the pot, and we're gonna make a floor. So we're gonna decide how big is the bottom of the pot. And we do that right at 6 o'clock. And then we're going to pull up the wall of our pot. So make our pot taller, bigger, and shape it. We're going to pull up the wall of the pot between 3 and 6. I like to keep it around 4:30. We're gonna naturally drift up the clock and just keep bringing yourself to that 4:30 mark. And again, this will be opposite if you're trying left-handed. All right, so I'm gonna make my ball of clay pretty round. I think we talked about this before. If I just keep doing this, it's gonna get like perfectly round. It doesn't need to be perfectly round, just pretty close. I'm going to, I've got my foot pedal here. You can't see that in the video. So I've got my foot pedal here, and it will stay in place. So if I start the wheel, I can actually take my foot off and it will keep going. Some people like to keep their foot on the wheel and control it. I like to do that, but at the beginning it can be a little tricky because we just have so many different parts of our like motor skills we're trying to control. So just know that you can put your foot on it, get it going to the speed you like, and take your foot off. I'm going to throw my clay. Is this where throwing comes from. Throw my clay into the middle, and I'm going to try to shoot for as close to the middle as I can get. The reason I'm going to sort of smack it onto the bat is so that it sticks. All right, so, all right, and now I'm going to go very slow, and I'm going to do kind of a patty cake. Because I'm pushing on the clay and the wheel is spinning, it's going to start to push it to center. All right, once I've done that, I'm going to add water. Now, I've mentioned before there are potters that work very dry and potters that use a lot of water. Wheel throwing is the same. That said, you will need to use enough water that you're not causing friction with the clay. So we need the clay to always be moving really smoothly to be able to keep our shape from getting messed up. All right, so I'm gonna pull my sleeves up, just get them out of the way. Oh, another important thing I'm gonna do, because I've got this long, luscious hair, is I'm going to put it up in a ponytail. I have literally seen someone get their hair caught in a wheel. They were fine, but it was pretty wild. Okay, so now I'm going to get the wheel going, and for centering, we want the wheel to be going very fast. So centering left side of the wheel between 6 and 9, and wheel is going really fast. We're gonna add water. Oh, that's a noise. And we're going to press down and back. So with this part of my hand, I'm gonna be pressing kind of down and back, and I'm gonna lock with my other hand, and I'm gonna use this part of my hand to press in, and I've got my elbows locked to my legs. My legs are the stronger muscles, so I'm gonna be assisting my arm muscles, and we're going to center. When I center, I basically push in and lock so that the clay has no choice but to go where my hands go. So I'm not just pushing and continuing to push. Though it would take an incredible amount of effort to push this off the wheel, it is possible. But I'm just pushing in enough to lock the clay in place. All right, and so now you can kind of move around and figure out what we call your sweet spot. So where everything kind of feels right. You probably take some trial and error to get there. But now we're gonna do what's called coning. So I'm gonna apply more pressure. You can see where the clay is on my hands, here and here. I'm gonna apply more pressure with this hand. So now I'm gonna push and keep pushing. And this is gonna make all of this go up. So it doesn't just spiral out of control. I'm gonna control or maintain with this hand. So this is called coning up. So I'm pushing in with my left hand, and I'm just kind of controlling over here. In on the wheel is the same as back and kind of down, so just keep that in mind. So now it's coned up. Now I'm going to use this part of my hand to just push this cone back. Back and down are the same on the wheel because it's spinning. And I'm just going to control or maintain with this hand. So now I'm going to push this down, and I'm just pushing and continuing to push until I get back to this cute little mound shape. Now everyone's a little different, probably in every aspect of throwing, although we have some best practices just to protect our muscles. So that's why we lock into our legs, because they're very strong muscles. That supports our less strong hand muscles and protects them from being damaged. But anyway, everyone's a little different, but I like this little mound shape to start. As you begin to make specific vessels, the actual starting shape may change, but this is a great beginner starting shape, this little mound. What I'm looking for is that there's not a mushroom thing going like this. We don't want that. And I like the mound to go up and down like a mound. versus having, sometimes people will press too much with this hand and we'll get like a dip in the middle. We don't want that. Okay, so we're gonna get to our mound shape. Sometimes, if we're not pressing hard enough here, we'll get a little drift down here, and we can just clean that up. We'll usually get that to some extent anyway, but sometimes we'll get a lot, so we can press harder with this hand, and we can clean up with a finger. Okay, so now that I've got it centered, I'm going to, another important thing is, whenever I'm centering or doing anything, when I take my hands away from the clay, I want to do it very slowly. So we've worked really hard to push the clay to center, and if we just pull our hands away, it's gonna knock this off center. I like to think of it as like the clay is like your friend, and so, you know, if you were like, you know, patting your friend on the shoulder to comfort them, you wouldn't just pull it away like you were allergic to them. We're gonna just gently remove our hands, and now we're gonna get ready to open our pot. So to open, I like to use my middle fingers. Some people use my thumbs, but I find, especially in the digital age, I already use my thumbs for too much. Like, I already have arthritis from like scrolling TikToks, and I'm gonna put just a little bit of water, and I'm using 2 fingers, but I'm kind of creating 1 point of pressure. In wheel throwing, we're always supporting. So it might look like I'm using every finger, but I'm really just creating 1 point of pressure, and then I'm supporting, locked hands together, locked hands to my legs. So I'm gonna start to make a little divot, and you'll see if you just push down, you make a little divot. Now I'm gonna fill up that divot with water. This is kind of like if you've ever used a drill press, so we don't wanna get any friction, so that's what I do that for. So I'm gonna press down as far as I think I wanna go. And then I'm gonna gently release, again, always gently release. Now, on the bottom of my pot, I want about 1/4 of an inch. A little more is great. Between 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch is great. I find an easy mistake to make, especially beginners, but like honestly everyone, myself included, is to not have enough clay at the bottom. And so having a little more at the beginning is great. I'm gonna use my needle tool. I'm gonna push the needle tool to the back, and then I'm gonna put my finger on the bottom, like where I can reach. And when I pick it up, I can see, you can see that? About 1/4 of an inch thickness. That's good, that's great. I'm gonna keep going. That little hole will fill in, no problem. So we've opened the form. Now we're going to set the floor. I cannot stress enough, set your floor. This is the #1 place where beginners beginners will just forget to do this all together, and it makes every other part of the process harder. So when we set the floor, it means we're gonna pull the clay out, and we're gonna make the actual bottom of the pot. A guideline I like to give beginners, which I heard somebody, a friend of mine, teach this, and I love it, is try to get at least a sponge worth of floor. All right, so in this stage, we are in the middle. Opening the form is in the middle, setting the floor is in the middle. 6 o'clock, we've got our wheel going very fast. This takes a lot of power, and this is one of the most difficult parts of the process, which is why I think it gets skipped. So I'm gonna make sure that I've got, again, plenty of moisture in there. I'm gonna put either my 2 middle fingers, or you can put, this is called the hook. You can put your 2 fingers from your right hand, your true first fingers, and then again, I'm always supporting. So I've got my other hand in there supporting. I've got my arms locked, and I'm going to pull toward me. And the trick is doing that in a very smooth fashion. It is difficult and it is scary. So just practice several times. And the first like 30 pots we throw, we should just plan to destroy them. Because practice makes perfect. All right, so now I've got a floor, which you can't see. That's cool. Now I've got my floor. you may find that when you pull when you set the floor, it does get a little wiggly, and so I'm going to do what I call like train tracks. It's actually like a train tunnel. I make this little motion with my fingers, and I imagine that's a little train tunnel, and now the train has to go through it, and any like villains or cowboys or whatever on top of the train, they're gonna get cut right off. So again, we want to always make sure we're dipping our fingers in the water so we have plenty, so that we don't have any friction. And I'm just doing very gently this little train track, but I'm doing it gently, but I'm bringing it in, locking the train track, and gently removing my hands. Okay, we have opened the pot, we have set the floor. We're going to compress the floor. Just like our slabs when we compress with our metal rib, we're going to compress this floor, and what I like to do is, again, the wheel's still going pretty fast. I'm gonna bring my sponge down, and I'm just going to gently compress the floor. The cool thing about the wheel spinning is that I only have to work here at 430, but it affects the whole floor. So I'm just going to like press just a little, and I'm moving between the center of the pot and the wall, and I'm just compressing that floor. This is going to make it stronger. I can also use the pad of my thumb to do this, and I use my hand almost like a tool. So my thumb is the tool, and my hand is now stabilizing it. And I do the same thing. This is the only time it will ever touch my clay without there being water on it. And that's just because this helps compress. Now we move on to the wall. I would say this is the second hardest, scariest part. But it is made infinitely more easier by having a floor. Okay, so when we call this pulling up the wall or pulling the wall, we're going to work between 3 and 6 at about 4:30. As we drift up, we'll bring ourselves back. We will have the wheel going slower now. This is a rule in pottery, and rules are made to be broken, but this is a very useful rule for beginners. The taller your pot, the slower your wheel. So the taller your wall, the slower the wheel, and as the wall gets taller, the wheel has to get slower. This is one of those things that you have to practice quite a few times before you really get the feeling, but just keep that in your mind at all times. Taller the wall, slower the wheel. Something that I like to do is just to pull any water out of the bottom. Now we're going to switch over here to the outside and inside. 4:30, wheel is going a bit slower. I want to make sure that everything has a little bit of water to keep everything moving smoothly. Even though I just picked up water from the bottom, it's going to keep going in there, and I'm going to keep picking it up. That is just a thing of throwing. I like to put some water right up here so that it kind of falls down onto both fingers and onto the wall. We're pulling the wall up, but our very first pull, I actually like to call it a push. So we're going to be working with our left hand on the inside and our right hand on the outside. On the outside, we can use our finger, we can use our knuckle, or we can use our finger with a sponge. All of those are perfectly fine. See what's more comfortable for you. I like to start with a sponge, and then as I get warmed up, I find that I'm using my finger because I have a little bit more precision. I often see people using their whole hand, and there are a few times when that is useful, but for pulling up the wall, we're mostly going to be using 2 points of pressure that are meeting up in some way through the clay. And that's because it gives us more precision. So I have a lot more precision holding this sponge with my 2 fingers than I do using my 2 hands, right? We're gonna start out using 2 points of pressure. So on the inside, I usually have my fingers. On the outside, I'll have my fingers, knuckle, or finger with sponge. And the very first pull is a push. So, I'm gonna make sure I've got plenty of water on everything. I'm gonna come in here. I can just make a little spot with my finger. That's for everything to go. And I'm going to push in, and instead of actually pulling up, which we will do next, I'm going to just push in with my whole hand. So hopefully you saw that. I went like this. And as you can see, the wall went on up. So this pushes the clay into this angle inward, just like with our pinch pots. If left to its own devices, this will become a pancake. Clay wants to go out. So pushing it up, our first pull being that push, gives us a head start on fighting that pancakeness. All right, I'm gonna go in, get some water out of there. Now I'm going to do my first official pull up, which is where my hands are actually going to move up. On the inside, this is hard to control at first, but you are just sort of supporting. You don't want to press down on the floor. It happens, it's not a big deal, but ultimately you will get enough control that you're just supporting. On the outside, I'm actually lower because I am on the outside, so I'm not running into the floor. And we talked about this before, right? Because we're on the outside and there's that floor, there's clay there, I'm gonna need more pressure. And then as soon as I get past that floor, I'm gonna ease off the pressure. So I'm gonna use a good amount of pressure, and I'm gonna basically push that extra clay up. And then I'm gonna meet up with my inside hand and gently, slowly bring the wall up. And as I get to the top, I'm gonna gently release. My wall is taller. I already feel like I need my wheel to go a little slower. That feeling can feel like panic, but it's not panic. It's just the knowledge that your wheel needs to go a little slower. All right, I'm gonna pick up water from the floor. Going to clean up this little outside bit. I like to give myself this little nook to go in. I get my wheel going a bit slower. And I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to push up using a good amount of pressure until I reach my inside hand. And then I'm going to gently move up. You really have to ease off the pressure as you get to the top, because now there's no clay here, so I need even less. So down here I need more because I've got the floor in my way. To ease off when I meet my inside hand, and then I ease off even more when I get up to the top. I'm going to do my train tracks just to tidy up this edge. All right. I'm going to do one more pull, and then we're going to move on to another piece of clay. Something important to know is that every time we are adding water, it's absorbing more water. It's going to be a little harder to work with. And so I recommend, as you're learning, this is something else I learned from like a great friend and fellow teacher. Give yourself only like 10-15 minutes max, and as you learn, make that number a little lower, because you can spend all the time you want with the clay, but your goal should really be to pull these walls up till you destroy it, because that is how you learn. Failing is how you learn. So you don't want it to absorb so much water that it falls apart on its own. You want to just learn every single part of the process. So learn the centering, learn the setting your floor, learn the pulling up your wall, and pull up your wall till it's too thin. Push as much clay out of the bottom as you can, and you might push through. That's fine. That's how you learn how much pressure it takes to push the clay out of the floor. Ultimately, we want our pots to look kind of like our pinch pots. We want that really even floor and wall. As we get into pots where we're going to trim more, anything that we can't touch on the wheel, we can trim later, but our goal is that everything we can touch on the wheel, we make it as even and consistent as possible. All right, so I'm going to do one more pull on the wall. And again, the wall is going to want to always become a pancake. It's like clay in general, like with our pinch pots, but also because of the centrifugal force, it wants to go out. So when I'm pulling up, I want to just show you, when I start, my hand is down here because the floor is there. It's going to come up, meet my inside hand, and if I put my hand on the inside on top, the pot's gonna go out. If I put my hands at the same spot, we're gonna mostly go up, although everything wants to go out. And then the way I kind of counteract that is I put my outside hand a little bit on the top so that we go a little bit in. Right now we are not forming, we are just making a cylinder. The very last step is actually forming the pot. All right, one more pull and then we're done. My wheel is going pretty slow. I'm gonna push in. I don't have much clay down at the bottom, so that's cool. Oops. Actually, I was actually just using kind of the side of my finger. I don't know why, but it kind of wanted to dig in and throw everything off. So that was another good reason to just use one point of pressure. Okay, so I'm going to use one point of pressure, gently coming up. This process is pretty slow. As I get to the rim, I'm going to ease off. Even more gently come up so that I'm evening out my rim. Do my train tracks. All right. The very last thing I'm going to do is called pre-trimming. I'm going to take my wooden knife. First, I'm going to just make sure I don't have any water down on the bottom. I don't want this sitting on the shelf with water in it. Then I'm going to pre-trim, so I'm going to take my wooden knife and I'm going to just take off the edge here. And then, so I did this, I went in like this. I'm doing this at 4:30, but just so you can see it. And then I'm going to come in with my knife like this. I'm going to, if I just leave this stuck to the plastic bat, because the plastic bat doesn't absorb water, it's just going to be stuck here forever. So I'm going to wire it off. And the way I do that is I get the wire, be careful because this can be kind of sharp, between my two fingers. I put it down on that and I press down with my thumbs pretty close to the pot, but not so close that I run into the pot. I super gently get my wheel going and I cut through. Most people do it twice or 3 times. Now, this will come off when it's ready. I'm gonna actually take this whole thing here. I'm gonna clean up my bat just a bit. And I'm gonna put it on the shelf and let it dry. And for the finale, we're just gonna look at what it looks like inside. How did I do? All right, so you can see I have not enough on the floor. No big deal, we're really just practicing right now, but that's gonna be important later. But if you look at my walls, they are pretty even. I don't have a bunch of clay down here. It is a little fatter, so you can see I could probably have pulled more up into the wall, but what we're going for is not having a big chunk of clay down here. And that's just because we're gonna have to trim it off later. We might as well get more height. All right, any questions?